What if I told you that by actively doing less, your project's chance of success just like skyrockets to 82%?
I mean, it sounds like one of those late-night infomercial promises, frankly.
Right, exactly.
But the thing is, the data backing that number up is actually incredibly solid.
Welcome to today's deep dive.
Yeah.
We're tackling a paradox that pretty much defines modern knowledge work. High exhaustion, but incredibly low impact.
Yeah, the classic grind.
Right. You finish a 10-hour day of back-to-back meetings, Slack messages, putting out fires, but if someone asked you what you actually accomplished, you'd draw a complete blank.
Which is such a frustrating feeling.
Oh, it's the worst.
Well,
So our mission today is to fix that for you by applying minimalist principles to the way you manage your projects. We're talking about aggressively tailoring your frameworks to basically cut out the bloat, reduce your cognitive load, and genuinely skyrocket your productivity.
and we are pulling from a really robust stack of research to get there. We're synthesizing data from a white paper by Crystal Consulting on project methodologies, plus some psychological studies on digital minimalism.
Yeah, and we also have insights from author Greg McKeown on the philosophy of essentialism, along with some really fascinating neuroacoustic research on how modern work environments actually affect your brain function. But before we can fix our teams and our organizational frameworks, we kind of have to look in the mirror. We have to confront the psychological trap that makes our workflows so bloated to begin with.
Because we live in a culture that completely conflates busyness with productivity.
Yes, it's the illusion of motion.
It's an intoxicating illusion, honestly. The research on mindful digital balance shows that we tend to measure our success by the sheer volume of tasks we check off a list,
Right.
rather than the actual significance of those tasks.
We just want to see the check marks.
Exactly. We prioritize the urgent over the important. And, well, the most dangerous part of this is the constant multitasking. We think bouncing between 6 different bloated processes makes us efficient.
But biologically, it does the exact opposite. I want to spend a minute on this concept from the research called attention residue. Because, understanding the mechanism here completely changed how I view my own calendar.
Oh, it's a game changer.
It really is.
It really is.
It's not just that multitasking is inefficient, it's that it literally degrades your cognitive capacity.
That is a vital point. Let's break down the actual mechanics of attention residue. When you switch from task A to task B, say you're writing a complex strategy document,
Okay.
and you pause to quickly check a notification about a minor administrative issue, your attention doesn't cleanly snap over to the new task.
Wait, it doesn't.
No, not at all. A residue of your focus remains stuck on the strategy document. Your neural networks are still trying to process the previous context in the background.
So you're basically running too many heavy applications in the background of your brain, and your mental RAM just gets maxed out.
That is a great way to visualize it. And every time you switch contexts, you leave another trace behind. If you do this all day, jumping between overly bureaucratic project management processes and granular tasks, this residue accumulates.
Wow.
You aren't just getting distracted, you are actively lowering your operational IQ. The cognitive cost of loading a new context into your working memory takes upwards of 20 minutes to fully recover from.
20 minutes. Man, which means if you're checking your messages every 15 minutes, you are never actually working at your full cognitive capacity.
Never. You're constantly in a state of degraded focus.
So the antidote to this isn't like a better to-do list app. The antidote is just doing less. And this brings up Greg McKeown's philosophy of essentialism, the disciplined pursuit of less.
Right.
Okay, let's unpack this, because there's a framework he proposes called the 90% rule that seems, well, almost impossible to implement in a corporate environment.
It is incredibly difficult, yeah. Mostly because of our social conditioning. The 90% rule is a ruthless heuristic for decision-making.
How does it work?
When you are evaluating a new commitment, maybe a new feature for a project or a new meeting to attend, you score your necessity or interest in it from 0 to 100.
Okay.
The rule states that if the score is not above 90%, you just change it to a 0 and deliver a hard no.
Wait, so if a project sounds like an 85 out of 100, meaning it's pretty good, it might have some solid ROI.
Yeah.
You still reject it.
You have to, because if you say yes to the 85s, your calendar fills up with these good enough initiatives, leaving absolutely zero capacity for the 99s when they inevitably come along.
Oh, I see.
Essentialism argues that if you don't fiercely protect your time by saying no, someone else will happily spend it for you.
I mean, I understand the logic, but I have to push back a bit on this whole minimalism trend in general. Isn't this kind of extreme, pristine minimalism a bit of a luxury?
How do you mean?
Well, according to the research we looked at on the impact of minimalist design,
Yeah.
it feels a bit like a toxic status symbol sometimes. You see these influencers with completely empty, whitewashed apartments bragging about living with less.
Right, right,
But they only have that luxury because they have the capital to just buy whatever they need at a moment's notice.
right.
It almost feels like a guilt-driven moral high ground after the 2008 crisis that, frankly, erases the reality of how messy actual work and life can be.
That critique is entirely valid, and the research acknowledges that. If minimalism becomes an obsession with an empty aesthetic, if you're constantly agonizing over whether you're allowed to keep a certain tool or process, it just becomes another form of cognitive bloat.
Exactly. You're still spending mental energy on the stuff, just in reverse.
But this is where the psychological studies on digital minimalism offer a really crucial distinction. From the Kurdish Studies paper, healthy functional minimalism isn't about the aesthetic of emptiness. It is defined by two specific psychological factors:
Which are?
digital intent and digital declutter.
Okay, so it's not about how empty the framework is. It's about the purpose behind what you actually keep.
Yes. Digital intent asks, are the tools, meetings, and processes you have strictly aligned with your end goals?
Right.
And digital declutter is simply the habit of systematically discarding what has lost its significance over time. It's about functional reduction.
Functional reduction.
Exactly. The goal isn't to win a purity contest by having the fewest project phases possible. The goal is to have the exact right amount of process to achieve your objective with zero unnecessary friction.
I really like that framing. So, if personal functional reduction works for an individual's brain, how does a 500-person organization scale that without causing total chaos? Because organizations fall into the busyness trap just like individuals do,
Right.
but the collateral damage is massive.
Oh, absolutely.
Let's look at the data from the Crystal Consulting white paper. The biggest trap companies seem to fall into is adopting an off-the-shelf methodology.
It is a pervasive problem. An organization realizes their projects are disorganized, so leadership goes out and buys a massive, highly complex, ready-made project management framework.
Yep.
And then they mandate that every single team applies it verbatim to every single project, regardless of size.
It's like buying an off-the-rack suit that is 5 sizes too big. Sure, technically it covers you, but it's incredibly heavy, it looks terrible, and you spend the entire day tripping over the extra fabric just trying to walk down the hallway.
That's a perfect analogy. And in project management, that extra fabric looks like requiring a 50-page charter document for a 1-week website update, or instituting daily stand-up meetings for a team of 2 people who sit right next to each other.
Right, so to make the suit actually functional, a tailor has to cut away all the unnecessary materials so the wearer can move naturally.
Which brings us back to that 82% statistic you teased at the beginning. The consulting data reveals a really stark contrast. About 42% of organizations operate with no defined project methodology whatsoever.
They just sort of wing it.
Yeah, they just wing it based on the manager's preference. And those organizations hover around a 66% project success rate.
Meaning 1 in 3 projects is either failing, going massively over budget, or just completely missing deadlines.
Right. But organizations that use a completely tailored methodology, meaning they have a framework, but they intentionally prune away all the excess process based on the specific project, they jump to an 82% success rate.
But here is the fascinating counter-argument from the workforce. The research notes that of the people who refuse to use a methodology, about a third of them claim their projects are simply too small to need one.
Yes.
They assume that any kind of process inherently means bloat.
Which highlights a fundamental misunderstanding of what a minimalist framework actually is. Process doesn't equal bloat. Irrelevant process equals bloat.
Okay, yeah.
Even the tiniest, simplest project requires an absolute minimum viable process to prevent it from derailing.
So what is that baseline? If we strip away the Gantt charts, the daily scrums, the massive risk registers,
Yeah.
what is actually left?
According to the framework analysis, there are exactly 3 non-negotiable elements.
Just 3.
Just 3. First, a justification. Why are we committing resources to this? Second, a defined scope of work. What exactly are the boundaries of what we are doing? And just as importantly, what are we explicitly not doing?
Right.
And third, a mechanism to manage changes. That's it. If you have those 3 things, you have a functional minimalist methodology.
Justification, scope, and change management. I want to linger on that third one, actually,
Mhm.
because change management sounds so corporate, but it's really just a defense mechanism against scope creep, right? It's how you protect that 90% rule once the project actually starts.
Exactly. Without a way to manage change, stakeholders will constantly try to add, just one more little thing, and suddenly your minimalist project is bloated again.
Okay, so we know the baseline, but how do we actually implement this tailoring process? The research outlines three distinct stages of tailoring, and the second one completely shifted how I think about kicking off a project.
It's a great framework.
Let's walk through them. Stage one is initial tailoring.
Right. So initial tailoring happens at the organizational level. This is when a company audits its overall constraints and builds that overarching standard. They look at all their available tools and templates and ruthlessly decide which ones are actually essential to keep in the company repository.
So they're basically building the wardrobes.
Exactly.
But stage two is pre-project tailoring. And here's where it gets really interesting. There's a concept in the research regarding modern productivity platforms, specifically how companies like Lark approach workflow called zero-based scheduling.
Yes. And to really understand zero-based scheduling, we have to look back at the 1970s and the creation of zero-based budgeting.
Okay.
Traditionally, companies build a new budget by taking last year's budget and tweaking it up or down a few percentage points.
Makes sense.
But zero-based budgeting argues that this bakes in historical inefficiencies. Instead, you start every year at $0. Every single expense, even the electricity bill, has to justify its existence from scratch to be included.
So if we take that financial philosophy and apply it to our project management methodology,
Yeah.
we get zero-based process.
Precisely. Instead of copying and pasting the massive 50-step checklist from your last software launch, which carries over all this historical process debt, you start your new launch with a totally blank slate.
Process debt. I love that term because so often we have meetings on the calendar simply because we had them during the last project, even if this new project has a totally different context.
Exactly. Zero-based scheduling forces friction at the point of creation. You force every single weekly sync, every tracking spreadsheet, every approval gate to justify its necessity for this specific project before you allow it into your workflow.
Wow.
If an element cannot prove it will actively reduce risk or increase velocity, it just gets left out.
It's the ultimate defense against zombie processes.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've set our perfectly tailored zero-based baseline. The project launches. We're done, right?
Which leads to stage 3, intra-project tailoring. This is the recognition that a project is a living ecosystem. Tailoring is an iterative, continuous pruning process.
So throughout the life cycle of the project, the team has to constantly take the temperature of the workflow.
You're constantly asking one diagnostic question. Is our current framework overcooked or undercooked?
Overcooked meaning.
If it's overcooked, you have too much process. You're seeing bottlenecks where work sits waiting for unnecessary approvals, or the team is spending more time updating task statuses than actually executing the work.
And if it's undercooked?
Then you have chaos. Deadlines are slipping, deliverables are failing quality checks, and communication is fragmenting.
Right.
Intra-project tailoring means you adjust the dial in real time. If a weekly status meeting was totally necessary in month 1, but is now just a useless 30-minute recap in month 3, you prune it. You cut it out to preserve the team's flow state.
Flow state. That's a term that gets thrown around a lot. But in this context, we're talking about that neurological sweet spot, right?
Yeah.
Where the challenge of the work perfectly matches the skill of the worker, and you sort of lose your sense of time because you're so deeply focused.
Yes. Neurologically, it involves a phenomenon called transient hypofrontality, where the analytical, critical parts of your prefrontal cortex temporarily quiet down, allowing for deep, frictionless execution.
Oh, wow.
And every piece of irrelevant process you force on a team acts like a speed bump, jarring them out of that state.
Which perfectly transitions us to the day-to-day execution. We have this philosophy of functional reduction. We have our zero-based frameworks. But how does a listener practically set up their personal environment to protect that flow state?
Right, the tactical side.
Yeah, because I feel like the moment I try to get organized, I fall victim to app bloat. I download a habit tracker, a complex database tool, a specialized calendar, and suddenly I'm spending an hour a day just managing the tools that were supposed to save me time.
That is the modern paradox in a nutshell. But the research into digital workspace architecture highlights a movement toward tools that fundamentally embrace minimalist design. They work by hiding complexity until you explicitly need it.
Like the app build-in, which was highlighted in the sources, it essentially acts as a unified blank canvas.
Right. When you open Build-In, you aren't hit with a dashboard of overwhelming metrics or complex nested folders. It starts as a distraction-free writing surface.
Just a clean slate.
Exactly. If you need a database or a mind map or a Kanban board, you can summon them, but they remain entirely invisible until you call for them. It prevents that visual complexity from arriving too early and triggering cognitive overload.
And for bridging the gap between what you need to do and the time you actually have to do it, the research points to tools like AccuFlow.
AccuFlow is fascinating because it uses interface design to actually force concrete decision-making. It features a very minimalist, keyboard-driven command bar.
Okay.
When a task enters your inbox, you can't just let it sit there and accumulate, creating mental weight. The architecture forces you to process it. You either schedule it directly onto your calendar, you defer it to a specific future date, or you delete it.
It's essentially software enforcing the 90% rule.
Hmm?
You have to decide if a task is worth your actual calendar time, and if it's not, you just drop it. Now, what about the environment itself? Because the research mentioned a neuroacoustic app called Endel, which is an entirely different approach to minimalism.
Yeah, Endel approaches minimalism from a sensory perspective. Instead of removing noise, it replaces chaotic environmental noise with highly engineered, adaptive soundscapes.
How does it adapt?
It uses an algorithm that takes into account your circadian rhythm, the time of day, and even your heart rate to generate continuous audio designed specifically to lower the brain's activation barrier for deep work.
So it's feeding your brain a biological cue that it's safe to enter that flow state.
Precisely.
But this actually brings up a huge caveat for me. I have a confession.
Oh.
Whenever I try to work in a perfectly silent, visually sterile environment like a completely blank white app or a quiet room, my brain absolutely short circuits.
Really?
Yeah, I have a bit of that ADHD energy where my mind will wander off to find stimulation if the environment is too quiet. I actually need intricate color coding and maybe 3 monitors and a visually loud environment just to anchor my attention so I can answer a single email.
That makes total sense.
Am I just fundamentally incompatible with minimalism?
Not at all. The workspace design research actually has a term for this. They call it the minimalism misfit.
Huh. I love that.
It acknowledges that for certain neurotypes, or for people doing highly routine tasks, an empty void is actually counterproductive. Their brains require a certain baseline of external stimulation to stay engaged.
So how does that fit into the philosophy of less but better?
Because true minimalism, as we established, is about digital intent. It's about functional reduction. If a highly complex, aggressively color-coded Kanban board or having a bustling coffee shop environment adds genuine functional value for you and keeps you anchored in a flow state, then that is your minimalist setup.
Because it's serving a vital intended purpose.
Exactly. Minimalism is strictly about removing the irrelevant, not removing everything just for the sake of emptiness. If the color coding helps you process information faster, it is essential.
Yeah.
If you're only color coding to procrastinate on actually doing the work, well, then it's bloat. You are the ultimate judge of what earns its place in your workflow.
That is a massive relief, honestly. Tailoring isn't just about cutting things away. It's about unapologetically keeping the weird, specific things that actually make your brain work.
Exactly.
So let's bring this all together. What does this deep dive mean for you, the listener, heading into your work week? Real impact, true productivity is not about sweating more or moving faster on the treadmill. It is about actively decluttering your methodology.
Yeah.
Whether you are managing a multi-million-dollar corporate rollout or just trying to organize your own monthly goals, you have to tailor your frameworks to the exact size of the objective. Don't wear a suit that is 5 sizes too big.
And start with a zero-based mindset.
Yes. Make every single meeting, tool, and checklist justify its existence today, rather than relying on historical process debt. And above all, fiercely protect your attention from the illusion of busyness.
Because your attention, free from residue and bloat, is the only resource that actually moves the needle. If you don't intentionally direct it, the world will happily scatter it for you.
Before we sign off, I want to leave you with a final, slightly provocative challenge. Think beyond your workspace. Think beyond your Jira boards and your Monday morning status meetings. What if you applied Greg McKeown's 90% rule and the concept of zero-based scheduling to your entire life's project portfolio?
Oh, wow.
Imagine you woke up tomorrow with a totally blank calendar. 0 obligations, 0 recurring social events, a complete blank slate. Which of your current personal habits, routines, or even social commitments would you actually choose to add back in?
That's a powerful thought exercise.
If you forced every commitment in your personal life to justify its existence from scratch, how much of your week would you simply refuse to rebuild? Think about it. Which parts of your life are just off-the-rack suits that no longer fit?
Something to really sit with.
It is a heavy question, but it might just be the exact mechanism you need to finally step off the treadmill. Thanks for joining us. Stay curious, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.